Greetings. I wanted to make another response video, a brief one, I hope. I wanted to give my regards to 50centpb7, who gave several interesting comments, good comments, comments that deserve a response, and I thought that this was the best way to do it. Firstly, he said that he couldn't help but think that Southerners like me were clinging to an idea of America that had died long ago. Now, I would submit to him that it certainly became a minority view, a minority experience a long time ago, that there have been several dominant American narratives, including the nationalism narrative that I submitted in my first response video that I posted yesterday, the new old nationalism, nationalism that has gone into eclipse now, which was an aggressive, expansive, united nationalism between the sections of the North and South. But I do interpret this as not an organic patriotism like what I'm trying to describe and praise and reaffirm, but a nationalism which would be an aggressive sort of, even an ideological sort of stance of what America means and an aggressive disposition to spread it by force. So this does come together with the Spanish-American War, for instance, and even to some degree with the wars against the Plains Indians and the conquest of the West and the final closing of the frontier. The Turner thesis that the frontier closed, meaning that the easily settled land, the easily seized commodities of the West, they were exploited, they were settled, they were conquered, and then Americans were forced to turn outwards. Turner's thesis, I think, is extremely good to explain how this nationalism developed and where the Spanish-American War came from. If you would like more information on that subject, not only Frederick Jackson Turner is a good source for reading, but also William Appleman Williams, his nifty little book, his provocative little book, The Tragedy of American Diplomacy, is another very good resource on that particular point. Why did Americans turn outwards in an aggressive stance, conquering the remnants of the Spanish Empire when they did? Okay, so I'm getting off on a tangent here, but I'm coming back to what I'm talking about. 50 Cent PBJ said that Southerners are clinging to an idea of America that died long ago. All right, it's an old idea of America, but my position here is that this is the organic disposition of people groups. So human beings, being human beings, are tied to places, established traditions, have a continuity with the past, have a connection with a place. And my contention is that patriotism, or love for those connections as such, is a natural virtue of human beings. And my position, I know it sounds radical to some, but my position is that Americans are human beings and that Americans have organic ties that admittedly they have not officially cultivated, they have not encouraged with law and institutions. But my contention is they should encourage those connections, and they have something to build on. My contention is not this is a predominant point of view. I would even be willing to submit that it may never have been a predominant view in American history. Now, personally, I would like to contest that because I think we've got a lot more constructive ground to build on in this respect. But I would like to reiterate my position that the United States of America is filled with peoples who are human beings with natural organic ties. That this is a healthy connection for them to have. I submit that most Americans may be alienated from these things. I know that alienation is a stupendous difficulty, perhaps especially with Americans. But although the global homogenization, globo homo, if you will, has become the predominant way of life in the West, though I submit that the American led homogenization of the Western world, the commoditization of life, the branding of life, the transference of organic loyalties, say to family, religion, and particular places, particular occupations, particular transcendent pursuits, though those have been transferred to things like the commercial brands of Wall Street. And that is a phenomenon in France, that is a phenomenon in Great Britain, that's a phenomenon in the United States, of course, and that is the predominant way of life for Westerners. I am saying that it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that way in France. It doesn't have to be that way in Germany. It doesn't have to be that way in Louisiana. And we all have something to build on. Now, admittedly, I think the French have a lot more to build on. But I think that this is partly because Americans have handicapped themselves by having official nationalist ideologies. We had the old nationalism that was very self-confident and expansive, Spanish-American War, conquest of Hawaii, World War I, let's order the world, let's make the world safe for democracy, those kinds of things. That's an ideological stance, whatever else we might say about it. I know there are some in our sphere that like that self-confident America. I like self-confidence as such, okay? I will give them that. And I see, oh, well, they had spirit. They believed in themselves. Well, that's a lot better than what we have now. I submit to that. I agree. I will take exception to other things. My critique would be more complex, but I'm not going into that here. Um, what I'm saying is that the history of France, the history of the British people, those are much older. Okay, they have a lot more to build on there. The Americans have ignored those organic ties for a long time, and therefore they have more work to do, and they have a shorter history. Okay. But we would not look at the ruling classes of Great Britain and France just as examples. We wouldn't look at Emmanuel Macron. We would not look at Rishi Sunak and say, oh, well, obviously these alienated weirdos with little care for the organic patriotic histories of their countries that they govern. They obviously represent that way of life, so it's hopeless. Okay, the patriots are out of power. The people who with roots in these places are out of power. Therefore, we're black-pilled. We say there's no hope. I don't take that stance with France. I don't take that stance with Great Britain. I don't take that stance with the United States of America. Call me controversial. That's my position. Secondly, 50 Cent PBJ made a very insightful critique, and I think a very warranted critique. All right, let me take a look and see exactly what he said. I'm assuming it's a he. If I've got this wrong, forgive me. He said, I'm always highly suspicious of identities built around tragedy. I worry they tend to ferment a kind of loser's mentality, where the loss and humiliation of defeat becomes a place of pride and belonging. Being a loser, then, and doing all the things that lead you to be a loser in the past becomes a point of virtue instead of what it should have been, a lesson learned, however painfully. All right, so he has more to say on that point, but I will take him at that introduction to the thought. I agree. All right, if the point that identity coalesces around is defeat, then that's all there is to it. That's, I think, by definition, a loser's mentality. It is a victim's mentality. And these these kinds of people that see themselves only in terms of being oppressed or not having agency to modify their circumstances or command their own destinies. I agree that that is a very unhealthy disposition, all right, and that unfits one for virtue. It unfits one to command will, right, to make difficult choices, to forge one's own destiny, right, to improve anything. Yes, I agree. There is certainly something of that in the Southern experience. We do associate this with certain groups in America. I'm not going into that because it's kind of off the subject, I think. Um, not to say that other groups in America aren't also Southerners in some sense. Um, the South would not be the South without these groups. Just leave that where it is. That's another conversation for another time. But I agree that if that's the only thing that is holding a group of people together, a common shared memory of losing, then that's unhealthy. But I am saying that I'm not saying that Southerners are defined by being losers. What I'm saying is that Southerners have experienced tragedy. Now, I know you're interpreting that as being a loser, but the literary form of tragedy is more complex than that. All right, the downfall of the tragic hero is a very complex affair. The hero has aspired to something. The hero must be likable. Now, I'm talking about Greek tragedy here. My reference here is Aristotle's Poetics. Forgive me. I know that I sound didactic. I don't mean to come off as annoying. I've taught Greek tragedy for many years, and so this is something that I think is really important and exciting. Um, but Aristotle says the tragic hero has to be likable. He has to have worthy goals. The audience watching the drama has to relate strongly to the tragic hero, has to want the tragic hero to succeed, to sympathize with the tragic hero's goals. All right. Now, the tragic hero reaches too far. Now, that is hubris. So it is an attitude that is mistaken. He does not understand his own limits to some degree. He does not understand who he is. All right. The best example of this is Oedipus in Oedipus Rex. So Oedipus is the king of Thebes. Thebes is suffering from a plague. There are riddles and prophecies related to this plague. The king has a responsibility to do something for the well-being of his people. And so he swears uh, that he is going to get to the bottom of the mystery. Now, getting to the bottom of the mystery, solving the problem, is what destroys himself. And of course, he is proud, he is arrogant, all right, but he is also praiseworthy. All right, we are supposed to like Oedipus, we're supposed to sympathize with Oedipus, which is precisely why we feel sad when Oedipus falls. We are supposed to feel catharsis when Oedipus experiences his tragic downfall, his nemesis. which is like divine vengeance for overextending oneself, for pride and arrogancy, okay, for overweening ambition. All right, so these are all very deep themes. I'm saying the South experienced that. And the key to appreciating tragedy is that you like the character, you like the tragic hero. If you don't like the tragic hero, Aristotle says it's a badly drawn character if there's nothing to like, and tragedy doesn't work if you hate the tragic hero. You look at the tragic hero experiencing his downfall and you say, ha, he deserved it. Yes, he's suffering. Good, right? You don't feel pity. You don't relate to his overweening ambition. We're supposed to relate to that. All right. That's the way by which tragedy works. That's the formula that we see in ancient Greek tragedy. So what I'm saying is that Southerners experience this, that this is a complex affair, but I'm not at all saying that this is the only thing that Southerners experienced. Southerners experienced so many accomplishments and victories. I'm thinking of Indian wars that Southerners fought in great numbers. The Creek War, for instance, where the Creek Indians were massacring settlers on the frontier in what was then Alabama and Mississippi, and Andrew Jackson and Southern militiamen, including people like Sam Houston and Davy Crockett, came in, organized, fought back, secured the frontier with Indian allies. They had allied Indian tribes at their sides when they did this. Okay, this is a victory that figures largely in the Southern imagination. It's something that we still remember. We like Andrew Jackson as a military hero and as a political hero. He's very important to us. We like these figures like Sam Houston, who go off to Texas and win the independence of Texas. This is something that is still very much in the imaginations, not just of Texans, but of other Southerners who have a common heritage with them. If you look at the people who died at the Alamo, you see people from all over the South there. Colonel William Travis was from South Carolina. Sam Houston was from Virginia. He was not at the Alamo, but he is a great Texas hero. Davy Crockett was from Tennessee. Jim Bowie was from Arkansas and Louisiana. These are very important figures that have a kind of cult following as folk heroes. All right. And it's interesting that the Alamo is such an interesting story because the Alamo is a defeat, right? It's a massacre. But the Alamo is a defeat that we are very proud of. That's an interesting story. I've had conversations with Mexican nationals recently, just driving the cab, and talked about the Alamo, and that's always an interesting conversation. They are also mystified by that Americans love the story of the Alamo. I had one Mexican recently. He said, "Oh, I thought you won that battle." And I said, "No, we lost it. You killed us all, and you didn't bury our bodies. You burned the bodies afterwards." And he was intrigued by that. He didn't understand how it is we cherished the memory of that defeat, probably because we won the great victory right afterwards. But what I'm saying is that Southerners are Americans who encountered firm limits to their ambitions early in American history. All right? Southerners were very instrumental in the fight of the War for Independence. They were quite committed and experienced in the War of 1812. They won the Mexican War. One reason why Tennessee is called the volunteer state, because so many Tennesseans volunteered to fight in the Mexican War. And Southerners were very well represented in that war. The Southerners have a great contribution to the American military tradition. We figure largely there. Even some of the greatest Union generals and military men were men from the South who nevertheless sided with the North. People like Admiral Farragut, people like General Thomas. They were Southerners, they were Virginians, but they sided with the Feds. All right, there's a phrase or a proverb that history is something unpleasant that happens to other people. That is an American observation about the meaning of history. That is a Northern observation, or the Old Nationalism, because Americans, well, Northern Americans went for so long without encountering limits. Every ambition they had, they realized, right? They were not used to frustration or failure. We have to go up to the Vietnam War before that tradition of Americans, that way of thinking among Americans encounters a firm limit, a realization of failure. They did not realize their ambitions in Vietnam, and they had to come home, and they watched the whole thing fall apart, right? That's a very important story. What I'm saying is that Southerners encountered that well before the Northerners did. And that's important. If we look at older nations like France, we see that they've encountered a lot of frustrations in their history. They've encountered great victories in their history. They have heroes. They have tragic heroes who failed in their ambitions. All right. What I'm saying is that the South has that texture. It has ups and downs. And healthy Southerners are not just going to focus on the losers. All right. It's interesting, even Civil War buffs like me, I obviously like the Confederate victories much more than I like the Confederate defeats. And the Civil War is very rich with great battles where we wonder, oh, well, they won on the first day, they lost on the second day. How could they have done it differently? But we obviously are loving our Southern generals and such at their best moments. We look at people like Lee in defeat, for instance, and say, oh, well, he handled defeat with dignity, with nobility, and we like him for that. But of course, we really are thrilled with Lee at Chancellorsville, right? At Fredericksburg, at some of his greatest victories. Southerners, in conclusion, Southerners are not defined by failure. They've just experienced failure. And in that, they are more like one of the old traditional peoples of Europe. All right? And that's my contention. I think Southerners are a little further along in the process of ethnogenesis than perhaps Northerners are. Now, I'm not trying to be chauvinistic towards the Northerners. I like them. I think of them as my countrymen. I'm very interested in them. I'm very friendly towards them. I have a tremendous amount of shared history and memory with them. They are much more my fellow ethnics than not. Okay, even if we are to have separate political futures, separate economic futures, we are still, or we should still be friendly towards one another. But what I'm saying is that Southerners just have this big defeat, and that helps them be defined as a people. Okay, so I've rambled on quite a bit. I hope that this was a bit enlightening. Best wishes to everyone. Goodbye.